With Michael Bay poised to release G.I. Joe Retaliation, the follow-up to G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra, arguably one of the worst films to ever get a sequel, I was curious where the idea to develop a G.I. Joe film first began. The often heard story is that Michael Bay's success with Transformers prompted the development of G.I. Joe to the big screen. But as I dug deeper, I learned a surprising truth. G.I. Joe was actually conceived as a film long before, and production had commenced when a strange turn of events halted the movie.
G.I. Joe! G.I. Joe!
I managed to track down the director of the project, little-known British director Jeremy Waterslew, whose resume up until that point consisted of local commercials and independent shorts. He claims it was his unique take on G.I. Joe that won him the director's chair. I sat down with Waterslew for an exclusive interview. How did you get the directing job on such a major film?
G.I. Joe, known in the UK as Action Force, had been dead since the early 1990s. So the studio got the rights from Hasbro for a song, right? They wanted to bring in a director with fresh ideas and a small paycheck. I had just finished a documentary on the life of Yahoo Serious, which they very much liked. So the studio called me in and optioned me to pitch them a concept for G.I. Joe. I started by reading the Marvel comics by Larry Hama and the original G.I. Joe cartoon. And I discovered something quite interesting, a character that is often overlooked but is deceptively integral to the G.I. Joe saga. Much of the focus on G.I. Joe is on Duke, Scarlet, Snake Eyes, but there was a side character called Chuckles that I became fascinated by. I knew Chuckles would be the central character for my G.I. Joe film.
This is a character that only appears once in the animated show, has no lines, and doesn't even show up in the comic for several years. Why him?
Mystery. Mystery surrounds Chuckles. Visually, he's a pastiche of Don Johnson and Magnum P.I., and his seeming lack of presence in the comic and cartoon underscore something greater. I pitched this idea to Daniel Craig. He loved the concept and signed on immediately to play Chuckles. In a moment of vanity, I suppose, we made Chuckles British because we're British, of course. We flew a crew to Africa and started shooting.
James Bond was cast as the star of a G.I. Joe movie. How come we've never heard about this?
Because Daniel Craig was not James Bond at that time, but he was perfect for the role of Chuckles. He had a perfect look, blonde hair, muscular build, a blunt bruiser expression. We shot for about 4 weeks in Africa for the opening of the film, in which Chuckles is undercover tracking a member of a terrorist cell tied to Cobra. Daniel was in the signature Chuckles costume, a floral patterned shirt and cargo pants with a pistol. He was amazing.
Why did the studio pull the plug?
Michael Bay had shown interest in the property. The studio didn't understand my take on G.I. Joe, and they needed a new Bond film. They decided they could make more money selling G.I. Joe to Bay and then detouring my film into a James Bond story to salvage the footage. They repurposed my footage as an opening to a remake of Casino Royale, and 007 fans wondered why there was suddenly a blonde James Bond. Simple. Craig wasn't supposed to be cast as Bond. He was cast as Chuckles, who is blonde.
How would the rest of your G.I. Joe film have played out?
The film was going to explore something earth-shattering about the origins of G.I. Joe, all of which center on Chuckles. Everyone knows about Snake Eyes being the central character of G.I. Joe, but what a lot of people don't realize is that in the 2 years Chuckles was available in stores as a figure, there were no Snake Eyes action figures available. That was the longest interval of time without a Snake Eyes, despite him being the most popular character next to Storm Shadow. Chuckles is described as a master at faking his own death. In one of Larry Hama's original comics, we see Snake Eyes fake his own death in a minefield explosion. Throughout the comic, Snake Eyes is depicted as having blonde hair, and in this issue, He is wearing the kind of Hawaiian pattern shirt that looks like something Chuckles would wear. My film would have asked the question, are Chuckles and Snake Eyes the same man?
Sadly, the world will never see Waterslu's film, but every time someone watches Casino Royale, the opening scene is actually a glimpse of G.I. Joe, codenamed Chuckles.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
He never gives up, he'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe will dare. G.I. Joe!